Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And today, we have a first timer here on the channel. My guest today was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, a border city with a rich culture and a place where the imagination is given every tool imaginable to thrive. My guest has constantly been immersed in folklore from both America and Mexico, with a rich blend of Native American storytelling to boot. As a little girl, her most incredible escapes were thrift shopping for books with her grandmother and holding up to read her treasures. In books like The Secrets of Nimh, a childhood favorite book of mine, and Julia of the Wolves, she found comfort in being just a little different from the other kids. As she grew older, reading books could only hold her over so much, and she began to write. Notebooks of poems, song lyrics, and short stories practically filled themselves if they were an arm's length of her. Of course, life can stifle what you love most as a child and forced to grow up, which for all writers, we all have to go through that. Fortunately for her, she was given a second chance and a third chance to be a kid again when she had children of her own. Now she's back into writing and giving life to stories that bring her joy. She hopes to share them with the world and never stop. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to a first time guest on the channel, author Em Fyre. Em, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So before we dive into your novel, How Could I Forget? Is there anything else you would like to add about your background, childhood, anything particular?
Um, I would really like to give a shout out to a couple of teachers. I've lost touch with them. I don't know if they'll ever see this video, but if they did run across it, I would love for them to know. My third grade teacher, she really pushed me to read because I wasn't very good at it. I grew up in an impoverished neighborhood. So reading was not something that they really focused on. And she did. She made sure that I was up to par and, gave me my wings in reading. And then in sixth grade, I had Miss Malone, who got me into creative writing. So she really pushed my writing into being um, just as imaginative as possible and really pushed me to describe more and elaborate more and give me more. So I really hope that, if they run across this, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. They're very special to me.
Awesome. I can definitely relate. I definitely had teachers who were instrumental for me growing up. Mrs. Trost of SDL Elementary was a huge help for me. I got into reading because of her, as well as many other teachers, and especially high school. Mrs. Singleton, a great teacher for history, and Professor Dennis Campbell of San Francisco State University, a great professor of Roman culture. They were all instrumental and really helped me hone my craft as a storyteller. And speaking of stories, I hear congratulations are in order because you just debuted your novel, How Could I Forget, not too long ago. So, what can you tell us about your story and what can we expect?
Yes, so it debuted on the 6th. This is a dark urban fantasy paranormal. Um, it's a lot different than what is already out there. They are creatures that create dreams and nightmares.
Hmm.
So there's in the dream realm, there's a lot of fantastic things going on. Kids that are, pushing limits as to how far they can imagine themselves going on their adventures and what they
Right.
can create. But on the flip side, because it is a dual perspective, we have the mom, and she is a mare, so she creates nightmares. Um,
Ooh.
So we do have a horror side to it. She does push the envelope in punishing people who she deems are evil and wicked and should pay for the things that they do while they're awake. Um, so it is, there's some triggering things when she's telling, when it's her side of the story. And then you lighten it up when you talk about the kid side. So it's fun, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback on that part.
Nice. So let's actually dive into how could I forget? So, according to your bio again, you're always into storytelling growing up, and then, as you mentioned also in your bio, time storytelling kind of just unfortunately faded away as you grew up. But you're able to find that passion again later in your life, and you're able to bring about this incredible story. So when you finally got around to writing and completing your story, what was sort of the need you wanted to satisfy for potential readers who would be interested in a story like this?
That's a really good question. And I had an incoming call. Let me get rid of that. Sorry.
It's okay. You're good.
All right. So I've thought about what need it fills. Um, One of the things that I really wanted to do, because I love to read, but I've noticed that in fantasy there's not a whole lot in my age group. All of the heroines are 20-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 19-year-olds. So when I created Liv, I wanted her in her late 30s, mid 30s.
Okay.
I wanted to give that feel that, life doesn't end after 20s. It doesn't end after you have kids. There's still a lot of adventure. There's still a lot um, to reach for and to accomplish. So I feel like that was one of the biggest needs that I wanted to fill with readers, especially in my age group. But the other part is the dynamic between parents and kids,
Right.
um, because it is told from that perspective of the daughter and the mother. And it's the same storyline, it's told from different perspectives. And I really hope that readers like delve into that fact that even though they're the same household and they're side by side, they're still separate lives. Um,
Mm.
Especially for parents and kids alike, if they're reading the story so that they can understand their parents, like, you know, kind of just give that perspective side by side.
Nice. And this sort of now leads into the next question, which is the promise. Now, I'll be first and foremost, I haven't read a lot of female driven stories until probably I started reading Season of the Dragon and The Last Dominion. Those two books were incredible. The heroines in those stories were amazing. And I think you may definitely have some thoughts on this, Em. When the average reader hears of the female driven story, we tend to have like either like stereotypes or tropes, which we'll talk about later in the interview, of what we imagine the story is going to be like based upon, oh, this archetype character. But for you, what was sort of like your goal or promise you set out with this book to where it's familiar to people who enjoy those types of stories, but it's not going to go the same beaten path as those stories?
Well, the biggest thing is that it's not romance driven. And I feel like with heroines, we always have that damsel in distress or, the man pushing her to do her best. And it's more her finding her own strength throughout the entire story. While giving the male perspective their space, it's still focused on her. It's not romance driven. It's internal. It's a lot of internal work that she's
Mm.
doing herself. So I think that would be the biggest promise or the biggest thing that sets it apart is the fact that it's not romance driven, told from a female perspective. And it's not exactly the thriller version either, where she's being attacked. She is the attacker. She's the anti-hero. Um,
Oh, okay.
that's pretty different when it comes to female roles. I don't think there's a lot of anti-hero female roles, but this one is definitely that.
Definitely. I will have to agree. And going back as well to Season of Dragon and Last Dominion, those stories were very, very incredible and almost very to the same degree of what you're telling me about. How could I forget how it's not there? There is, well, their stories do have a little bit of romance in it, but not where you would think like romance, like romantic partners, but more like a romance where it's like the bonds that they forge with the people around them who they consider their family, which is in sense a romance in of itself, but also giving the character the ability to grow through the chapters, through the experiences, and really get into, who they are. Which then leads into the next question, which is the first of many heavy hitters. So, when you finished editing this, finding cover artists, finding an editor for a second look at, and doing all of that, and finding a publisher and doing all of the research and market, and you put it out there, what was the feedback like? Positive, negative? You can even talk about ARC readers or even beta readers who read your story to give feedback on that too.
Okay. Well, when I first started querying, I did it because my daughter's an artist. And
Ooh,
so
okay.
she was needing a push to showcase her art because she wanted to grow up to be an artist and show her art, but she was afraid to show her art. And I was giving her a pep talk, but then she turned around and was like, well, Mom, you're a writer and you never show off your work. So she kind of made me put my money where my mouth is. And when I had finished writing How Could I Forget? And I was like, okay, bet. So I had sent it out to prove a point to her that it's okay to get rejected. It's okay to look around, find different things that work for you. And really, I thought I was going to end up just self-publishing everything, but it got to Spellbound, and it was still really raw. I hadn't done much editing on it, but they loved it. They definitely told me it's going to need editing, did the timeline. When it got to beta readers, that's where I got my first feedback on it. And I was really grateful because they did find stuff like, oh, there's a plot hole here, and this character isn't very likable. I don't see the point of it, which really, the first time they did that, it was one of my main characters. I was like, what do you mean you don't see the point?
Oh, okay.
So it's like, wait a second. So when I did the revisions for that, I built on her character. I made her a little more daring, a little
Mm,
more, because it was my 15-year-old. So I tried to grow her up a little bit.
nice.
Um, and so it was fun. The beta reading, I was really happy to do. My revisions, then I went to line editing. My editor is amazing. I went through Veritas Editing Collective. So it was going through Google Docs and reading through her comments of this is great, or this it's a great little snippet, but it slows down the story. Take it out. So it was really great. And then the final proof editing, I still got a lot of during my ARC reads, there was still people catching little things, not big things, but like grammatical or the formatting was a little off.
Right.
So beta and ARC readers really saved me a lot when it came to the editing, and offered a lot of insight and helped me through the process. I would definitely recommend.
Nice.
Yeah.
And we'll actually talk about arguers and beta readers in the business side of the interview. Before we get to that, so from those interactions with your ARC readers and beta readers, did their reviews in a way validate your promise and your goal you set out with How Could I Forget?
Yes. And it was funny, you know how I mentioned about the age, there
Right.
was a millennial reader, and she read it and she's all like, oh my God, I was reading about how the daughter was talking about her mother's music and I felt my age, but the story was so good that it kind of just she enjoyed it that much more because she could relate to the mother's age, she could relate to the way she thinks, the things that she likes, and how she processed things throughout the story. So I was really happy when I read that. Well, when I saw the review because it's up on TikTok. And so when I saw that, I was like, great! It hit one of the readers that I was pushing to get to. Like, hey, we're not out of the picture. We can still have adventures. It's still cool.
I don't think I've ever had a book like that where I've had experience with like, oh geez, because I haven't had that experience yet. I don't, yeah, no, I haven't read a book where I've had that experience. Like, geez, I am old like that, but that is like an incredible experience, and probably an interesting review example that I've had on the show thus far, which then leads into a very serious question, which I'm sure you agree, Em, that being an author is not an easy journey. It's hours and hours of editing, hours and hours of revision, planning, and so forth. And it may take years, or it will probably take years for the book to launch. And even when it does, there's no guarantee that it's going to hit the target audience or anything like that. And then that voice of imposter syndrome comes in the back of one's head telling you you're in the wrong field, you shouldn't be here. So for you, and your journey, have you ever had those moments of imposter syndrome? And if not, what has disciplined you to continue to tell this story, because this story needs to be told?
Well, I did get imposter syndrome, and I think it was about the time, actually, it was right before it was going to launch that we were talking about pricing the book.
Mm.
That I was just like, I can't imagine asking people to pay me to read this. Like, it's I should be paying people to read my book. I just like went off the deep end. I my publisher was like, calm down. This is a great book. It's good to sell, and you're great for the market. And it was really hard. But I have a great community of writers that, I reached out to. I kind of cried a little bit, and they're like, hey, you're doing great. We've read your work. It's a good story. It needs to be told. Um, it needs to be told for, like, there was a lot of reasons. One being that, I was setting the example for my daughter, which was the reason why I did it to begin with. Um, then other readers were reading it, and they were like, we don't have a book like this. You have to put it out there. You know, Single mothers in fantasy, they have such negative connotations. They're usually evil or just broken so badly that they're off the beaten track. So they needed the story. So that kind of pushed me. The other part of me was I'm very punk rock. So there was some times where I was just like, I'm gonna put it out there because I want to put it out there. I like my story, and if nobody else likes it, oh, well, that's okay. I still like it. Um, and what usually would drive me when I would get tired, or I thought this was not a good idea, pushing myself into knowing that I did this and it should be out there. It deserves to be on a bookshelf.
I 100% agree, and I have to agree that the price range when I was posting my blog is like, are people really going to like this? Because my genre of storytelling is historical fiction, and I love to bring ancient worlds to life. But the thing is, I have to sort of balance between the storytelling side and the academic side, because I can go heavy into the academics of like history, but I don't want to have it be a nonfiction reference book. I want this to be a story that people can immerse themselves in. And then putting the price and looking at the pages, how many pages there were, and the size is like, is that really the best price range for a first time book? And it went through numerous times. And when I finally put it out there, people bought the book. And I was like, okay, people like that. And that, of course, comes to the marketing, which is now the business side of the interview, which I have found to be very important. So for you, and you are signed with one publishing house for your debut novel. But I'm curious, before you made the decision to make a query letter to send it out to a publishing house, did the idea of self-publishing present itself? And if so, how different do you think, how could I forget, be different as opposed to traditionally published with a publishing house?
Oh, so many things would have been different. I mean, there's so much information out there. And to be honest, I was going to self-publish at first, but again, there's so much information. I would have been lost on the formatting. I would have been lost on the whole developmental process. I didn't even know there was a process to it. When I first thought, I was like, look, people are going to go in there, make sure everything is spelled correct, everything is grammatical, and that's it. But when I went through my publishing house, they're like, oh no, there's an editing process for, plot holes and whether it's you need to change things up, whether it's marketable. Then there's line editing, then there's proofreading. I didn't know about beta or ARC readers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then on top of that, I do have a lot of writer friends in different communities that do self-publish. And, going through beta or ARC readers, it's about, a lot of them want book swag, or, the beta readers, they do sometimes have a fee because they're basically doing a form of editing for you through the
Right.
plugins and stuff. So um, going through them, I at least had all of that covered, the beta and the ARCs, and then some of my editing done too. I did do a lot of the editing myself, which wouldn't have changed if I had self-published, but I didn't have to do all of the editing. My publishing house made sure that there was something taken care of for me, to make sure that I put out as good as I could, um, before they sent it out into the world.
Definitely 100%. And speaking of your publishing house, so how did that come out? Because I always find it interesting and very important to bring this up is that for those who go around the traditional publishing route, it is not easy because when you're making a query letter, you're since making a cover letter to a company in the genre that you want to write for, whether it's Forge, Tor, Del Rey, and any other ones. It's not easy. It's a very daunting process because you really have to sell yourself. You have to sell who you are. You have to give a quick blurb and an elevator pitch, and that's a lot of research too. So, how did that relationship come about with your publishing house, and what made you decide that this is the publishing house that is the best chance for my story?
Well, I had gone through a couple, and I got callbacks from other publishing houses. They were also smaller ones. But the first thing that threw me off was, well, we like your story, but we would like you to change this. And we would like
Mm,
this such. And it can't have this. And my book is very triggering. Um,
right.
and there is profanity in it. Um, there's just some violent scenes in there. And I didn't want to give up my creative control for my book at all. That
Right.
was my hard limit. It wasn't going to go away. When I sent the query to Spellbound, I was not expecting to say you can have all creative control of your book. We'll make our recommendations, but it's ultimately your decision if you want to do it or not. If you don't want to do what we're recommending, that's fine. It's your book. We still would like to publish it for you. Um, and they were very down to earth. It was a Zoom meeting after I sent the query. They're like, hey, we'd like to meet with you. Can you hop onto Zoom later? I think it was like a week out. And I was super nervous. I mean, I was like, okay, this is serious. They didn't come out with, we'd like it, but it was we want to talk about it. And when I talked to them, the vibe was what I was looking for. I wanted something more down to earth, something that I understood, because you get lost in the marketing jargon. It's big business, book business. It's pretty in depth. If you
It
if you've
is.
done it before, it's a lot. And there's a lot of contracts, and you know a lot of things. They ask you where you got your idea. influence, this and that, because they want to make sure you're not, bumming ideas off of somebody else. So it's very lengthy. It's a lengthy process. But Spellbound, like I said, they were very down to earth. They got down to the meat and potatoes right away, and they gave me all the creative control that I wanted over my book, something that was the most important for me.
That's awesome. And the reason why I bring this up, my viewers and listeners, as I've said numerous times, whatever route you go to, it's all up to you. It's your decision, but it is important to do the research. If you go the self-publishing route, it's all on you. Marketing, finding an editor, finding a cover artist, finding an art team, finding a beta team. That's all out of pocket, and that's all finances and management. For traditional publishing, the traditional publishing route is a little bit easier in the sense that the house is in charge of all the marketing, but the house has to treat your work, or any house with any product that it gets, treat it like a business. They have to see if your book is going to sell and be marketable. Specifically, if it's like a big one or a small one, no matter what it is, they have to see they're going to get revenue from it. And if your book doesn't, then hard pill to swallow, they will axe the book if it doesn't make as much sales. So it's all of that and more. And speaking of that, another thing you also have to look into, which is also the publishing house and the author, is the target audience. Who is the book written for? Because if it's for fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction, YA, near adult, those are all taken into consideration to see, okay, is this book going to hit the mark with this audience, either in specific subgenre or in the general sense. So for you, Em, how important was it for you to really understand your audience for your book? And when did that like aha moment come out? It's like, oh, now this is like a business now.
Oh, wow. So I think the aha moment, I'll work backwards with that one, was actually during arc reads, which is really late in the game. Because you want to, while you're writing and while you're doing your editing, you're promoting yourself. That way, by the time release date comes, you already have followings and stuff like that. Um, so honestly, like especially with my house, because it's hybrid, I was in charge of my marketing.
Right.
Um, that was the one thing where they're like, okay, you do your website, you do your newsletters, you do your social media, that's your job. And we'll take care of the publishing, the formatting, editing, things like that. So, okay. Um, and I had to really think about the content, because I didn't want too young of readers reading my
Right.
books. I was very conscientious of that. It's not sexually explicit, but it does have reference to sexual assault. It does have
Mm.
um, it does have a rape scene in there. So, things like that where it's like, okay, I don't want to hit a crowd that's too young. It can go as far old as your 40s or 45-year-olds, but they don't typically read fantasy.
Right.
So that's where it kind of gets like iffy, because the age group that does read fantasy, dark fantasy, they're very young, but the intended mark doesn't really read fantasy. So it was really iffy and in between. I've noticed that it is hitting more in the 25s to 35-year-olds now, but it wasn't until it got out to ARC readers that we found, okay, it's hitting this target. Because it was hard to kind of figure out what target it would hit because of the dual perspective. One of them is a 15-year-old girl, and the other one is a middle-aged woman. So
Right.
that age range was really wide. It was a really wide net and hard to kind of narrow down.
Right. And sort of following the same route, do you have a better idea of your readership for when you started writing this before you even published it to now? And the reason why I bring this up is, as you said, the story is intended for one audience because of the genre that it's in, but the themes, the trigger warnings are too adult and mature for that young audience. And sometimes the readership changing is very interesting because it opens up a new market. So, how did that sort of come about for you, for your story? And as I said before, do you have a better idea now of your reader than before when you started writing the story?
I do think that I've opened up a new market. When I really think about it, because like I said, typically the age range that I'm hitting, they don't typically read fantasy. If they do, it's like epic fantasy. Um, it's Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit type of fantasy readers, but I've opened it up to an easier fantasy that they are appreciating, and I'm glad that they are. And I hope that it continues to be in that reach. As far as the younger, maybe new adult can definitely handle it. Young adult is still a no-go for me, even in the next book that's coming up.
Right. And then now, kind of leading into the story craft itself, I find this question always important and very fascinating to know what elements really inspired and brought about an author's work. Now, you mentioned in your bio that the Rats of Nim and many more stories were like big inspiration for you growing up. So now, when you crafted your own story, what authors or works of fiction were really essential into bringing the world to life in terms of character development, arcs, world building, narratives, themes, and even as an add-on, film and TV?
I love this one because actually it's a lot of oral storytelling that really
Ooh, okay.
um, that really inspired my writing. Like I said, I grew up right on the border of Mexico, Texas, and New Mexico. So I have a lot of Mexican folklore, I have Native American folklore, I have Southwest folklore, and a lot of it is still very oral. Um, Especially my Native American storytelling background that I have. It's not written, and but there's a lot of stories about skinwalkers and shapeshifters and
Mm.
dreamwalkers and things like that. It's not necessarily written down. There's snippets of it that you'll find in the library, but the bulk of it has been more in oral tradition in my area that I've heard the stories. I've sat at so many um, fires to hear the stories and listen to my elders talk about these stories. So a lot of that comes from them. The writing itself, I would definitely, look out for people like Anne Rice or Maggie Stiefwater. I love the way they write, even Holly Black, where their fantasy is easy to swallow. It's easy to imagine. You don't get lost
Mm.
in very descriptive things, but it's still very poetic and beautiful in itself. So I think it's a little mixture of everything, the oral tradition mixed with beautiful, easygoing fantasy that molded the way I tell stories. Music has a huge impact on my writing. I do not write in silence. I have to be listening to everything from Blink 182 to Frequency 15 to, I mean, mariachi music, anything that will get feelings going that I want the characters to feel. I'm usually tapping into music to kind of remind me of that feeling.
Nice. And I will just say this: you and my friend and fellow author Raven would hit it off so well. And for those who remember Raven White, she is an author and owner of her own publishing house, Curious Corvid, and she is incredible storyteller. So I think definitely you guys would hit it off so well. And ultimately, this kind of leads into the next question, which tying back to the reviews and everything, because I definitely feel for a new time author, and you may also have thoughts on this, probably the biggest danger a new author can fall under is they believe their own hype. And what I mean by this, viewers and listeners, is that if you are told that your book's going to be the next best thing, it's going to hit all the markets, that's good encouragement, but you shouldn't take all of it. You should take a little with a grain of salt, because if you're writing any particular genre that's very popular, which I've mentioned this numerous times on the channel before, if you want to go the romance fantasy, which is the most read genre in the book world now, and you try to join the ranks of the Fourth Wing or other books like that, not only is not going to be your best work, but you're going to miss the mark, and that imposter syndrome comes back. But one author who I had on the show gave me the best piece of advice, and I would really love to hear your thoughts on this, Em, which is there is no guarantee for a young author, for a new author, that their debut novel is going to be the start of their legacy. Now, authors are like a coin. There's a 50-50 chance it could go yay or nay. I've met
Yeah.
authors who have been very successful with their debut novel, and they're able to live off of that success to write more stories. But on the other side of the coin, we rise, fall, rise again, and fall even harder. And then the voices of imposter syndrome comes back with a vengeance. And this ultimately comes back to what I like to talk about, which is the two mindsets, to be or want to be known as. If you wanted to be an author, that is one mindset, which some would argue, where you create stories with not the sole intent to be known or make a career off of in terms of capital. But to be known as an author is the opposite, because you are going with the intent to make money, to make this just your career, and it's a lot of work. And ultimately, tying back to the first thing of legacy, that is important for any author to understand. So, Em, in your opinion, how important is it for new authors to understand that their debut novel may not be the start of their legacy, in the sense that that's the one that people are going to know them the most, but it should not deter them from storytelling if storytelling is indeed their passion?
That is a great question. I love it, especially because of the reason why I wrote the book. Um, and it wasn't with the intent of immediate success or immediate fame or immediate riches, anything like that. I didn't even expect to get published, to be honest. um, but it's important to, if it's your craft, if it is something you're passionate about, put it out there. You never know who is going to love it, even if it's just one person, if it's two people and the rest of the world hates it. Um, that might be somebody else's comfort read, somebody
Right.
else's go-to book to just be inspired about anything, something, because in a world that's as dark as the one we live in, any spark is better than none.
Right.
Um, so I really think that as an author myself, to any debut sorry, baby author, somebody who's been writing their one story for the past 10 years, whatever it is, put it out there. I mean, no, you might not become famous, maybe not with the first one or the second one or ever, but if you're writing it, it's for a reason. If that story
Hmm.
is linked in your mind, it's for a reason and it should be out there, especially, the way I encouraged my daughter that wanted to be an artist. She never knows who it's going to inspire, whose room that portrait is going to light up, she's going to love that sculpture so much, it's going to just make them happy for even a split second. As storytellers, I think that we're responsible for the way we mold the world. And even if it's just one mind, one person, that story was inspired for a reason and it should be put there.
100%. And also to add on to that, as I've said numerous times on the show, grit trumps talent. Doesn't matter if you are a naturally gifted storyteller or if you can eloquently write the best kind of characters, or you can even develop your own language, which that in itself is a huge accomplishment and achievement. Grit
Definitely.
trumps talent. Because as we talked up to now in this interview, being an author, be it traditional or self, is not an easy job. It is long hours, it is a business, and we have to treat it as a business. We all go through hurdles, we all go through everything. And if you make the decision that you want to reap the benefits but not go through the hurdles, you may want to reevaluate what were your long-term goals. But if you do want to go through the hurdles, the fires and the flames, little Dragon Force reference for those who remember that band, then you will be fine because grit transforms into talent. Perseverance is key. And who knows? It may be your seventh book that people know you the best for. And when that happens, you can tell your fans who have been with you from the get go, from the very beginning, hey, if you like my seventh book, you should check out 621 because then you'll see my growth as an author, which that itself will gain new readers. And who knows? Your seventh book may also get you contracts with the media company for companies who want to adapt your work into a limited series or a film. Because let's face it, almost every movie or TV show is based off of a book, which is good. And I mean, it's much more than it was a decade ago or 2 decades ago, which is incredible. And also, it doesn't hurt to have a good fan base and a good group of friends and family who have been by our side from the very beginning, being our biggest cheerleaders and our biggest critics. So now let's actually explore that. So for you, who have been your biggest supporters and cheerleaders for you on this journey of yours?
My kids for sure. They're my cringe-o-meters also, as I call them. I will run by a scene or a line that I think of. I'm like, what do you think? And they're like, boo, no, don't write that. People will hate it. And other times I love it. So they're definitely um, my cheerleaders. They're very excited. Um, my daughter in particular. My son, he's still 12. So some of it kind of goes over his head like, cool, you're writing a book. Okay. But they're still my main cheerleaders, my best friends. They're both named Jessica, but they have been my best friends too. I mean, they're my cheerleaders. They call me up and, remind me to keep writing, to keep doing it. When I first got the first Zoom interview with Spellbound, I was gonna chicken out. I got really nervous, and
Okay.
my friend Jessica, my bestie, she was just like, "No, ma'am, you're not gonna chicken out. You're gonna log in." And minutes before the Zoom meeting, she was texting me and telling me, "Hey, don't forget to sign in and make sure that you don't forget and you don't chicken out." And then of course my brothers and my mom, they there to support me. They took care of my kids so that I could have time to write, so I can have time to edit. Well, especially during the editing process, they were like,
Yes.
"Hey, we're gonna take the kids out so that you can have some peace at the house," or, "What do you need? Do you need us to do some grocery shopping because it looks like you haven't left your house in weeks." Um, so they're big supporters. I had a lot of support going through this. I'm really grateful for them.
Awesome. And now another fun question. Have you ever gotten a sense of validation from fellow authors who you interacted either in person or online, especially on Bookstagram? And the reason I bring this up is that meeting other authors is always an incredible thing and sharing stories. And when you tell an author that you've respected and admired or one that you followed from like the get-go, and you tell them your story and they read your story and they give credit where credit is due, that is a huge uplifter and a huge confidence boost. But it's also, again, a double-edged sword because that also brings up the long-term goals. Did you go on this journey to be a writer to get validation? Validation doesn't hurt in of itself, but if you abuse validation where you're constantly seeking it, that's another thing entirely. So for you, Em, are there any authors you would like to shout out who not only have been your biggest cheerleaders, but have also given you a sense of validation.
Well, I've gotten a sense of validation from several authors. Again, I'm part of a big writers community. There's the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Writers Alliance, the authors through Spellbound, and a couple of just indie authors that we've become friends over Instagram. Um, One of them is A.C. Crown. He's a horror novelist.
Ooh, okay.
He was like, I can't wait to get my hands on your book because, I've talked to him about it. He's like, I have to read this. And that was like a lot of validation. I wasn't looking for it or expecting it, but the fact that another horror novelist wants to read my stuff, that was a big old boost. Um, my and she's in my acknowledgments. I do want Sarah J. Maas to read my book. Because in her book, she had mentioned that the 30-year-old human queen was an ancient crone. And that really lit a fire under me. So I'm like, now she has to read my book and see how people are not ancient at 30 years old. They're still badass and they still do remarkable things and they're beautiful while they do it. So I hope one day she reads it and, gives me a shout out or tells me you're right.
Nice. And also, to this, I'm in my late 20s, like almost in my early 30s. So it's like, I do not agree with like the last sentence that you phrased. It's like, I've been working on my story for almost like 5 years when I was in my master's program. It's a long journey, and I was now got my first book out. I got my second book out in the exact same year, and now my third book's in the final stages of editing before I make the announcement for ARC applications, pre-orders, and stuff like that. So we'll have to wait and see. And now we arrive at the final question of this incredible interview. So, Em, with everything that you've learned from your fellow writers through your own experiences and your journey as an author, what is your word of wisdom to future indie authors who watch this video and want to get a head start and bring their work to creation?
My biggest word of advice is don't overthink it. I think a lot of authors, they get stuck in editing and re-editing and re-editing and re-editing and re-editing and re-editing. And
Yes.
a decade has passed and their story is done. Um, they just need to put it out there. So I would definitely say don't overthink it. Um, that story, it's gonna light up somebody's life. Put it out there. And bask in the fact that you got it out there. Um, I I think that is the best advice I can give them. The second best advice is trust your gut. And if you don't trust an editor or you don't trust a publisher
Yes.
or trust somebody signing up for beta or arc read, something gives you a bad vibe, trust it and change directions. Because there's a lot of work stealing out there, and you should definitely trust your gut and be careful with that kind of stuff.
100% completely true. And now we've arrived at the end of this incredible interview here on The Wandering Scribe. Now, before we end, I want to give a huge thank you to Em for coming on the show and telling us all about her journey as an author and her story. And speaking of her story, and where can people find your story to purchase and read for themselves? And where can they find and engage with you on social media?
Well, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I also have a website if they want to sign up, subscribe to newsletters. To buy my book, Amazon, on Spellbound's website, Spellbound Publishing House. They have my book on sale. Smashwords has the ebook. Barnes and Noble has my ebook. It's on Booktopia if you're in Australia. It's also available there. And New Zealand, I believe, also has it on Booktopia. I think I've gotten them all. Kobo has it. I think that's part of Barnes and Noble. Oh, Books and Apple Books also has it. So just about anywhere you can get a book, you'll be able to find it. But if you want a physical copy, then my publishing house has the link for it, and so does.
I will link all of them below in the description of this video, as well as M's social media, for you all to follow her and her journey and to stay up to date with all of her upcoming projects. Well, my viewers and listeners, thank you all so very much for joining us for another author interview. This now concludes week 2 for the month of June. Stay tuned for the next 2 weeks because I have some great guests lined up for that. But you have to wait and see or follow my newsletter to stay up to date with all of my guests. And again, thank you all so much for joining us. And a huge thank you to Em for coming on the show and telling us all about her work. And I cannot wait to see what else she has in store for us. So, Em, thank you so very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and thank you to all the viewers who, watch.
You're most welcome, Em. And thank you all so very, very much for your love and support. I actually looked back on YouTube today before I joined this interview. 97 subscribers and 137 videos since January of last year. That is incredible. So thank you all so very much from the bottom of my heart. It really means a lot. And you are all so kind with your comments and feedback. So, as always, like and subscribe and comment down below what was your favorite part of the interview. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you a wonderful day.